Hi, Brian Lehrer here. Up next, Brian Lehrer Weekend. Three of our favorite segments from the week packaged together for you to listen to on the weekend. So enjoy, and I'll see you back on the radio Monday at 10 a.m. on WNYC and WNYC.org. It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning again, everyone. Howard University history professor Ibram X. Kendi is back with us. Some of you know his influential books, such as How to Be an Anti-Racist and Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. His new book is called Chain of Ideas, The Origins of Our Authoritarian Age. The Origins of Our Authoritarian Age. We'll talk about that now, including how it relates to the current backlash against all things DEI, and some of that backlash has been directed at him. Professor Kendi, thanks for coming on. Welcome back to WNYC.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Let's start, as your book does, 30 years ago, 1996. A French novelist coins the term Great Replacement Theory, which you say is now the most dominant political theory of our time. Who was that French novelist, and what did he mean by Great Replacement Theory?
So the French novelist is named Renaud Camus, and he's a pioneering French novelist. And when he was in southern France in the late 1990s, and frankly, first in 1996, he perceived that people of North African descent who were likely Muslim were overrunning this town that he was in, that they were everywhere, and that ultimately they were replacing white French people and their cultures. And at the time, though, North African immigrants and African migrants more broadly only made up about 4 to 6% of that actual area. So, of course, he exaggerated the number that was coming, as great replacement theorists typically do. But he essentially framed these people as replacing white people and as taking over.
But also that there was a group of elites who was directing this, right?
Yes. And so that's a critical part of great replacement theory, which we can define as a political theory that powerful elites are enabling peoples of color to displace the lives and livelihoods of white people who thereby need authoritarian protection. And so when we hear terms like immigrants are invading the nation, we're hearing great replacement theory. When we hear ideas like we need to solve that problem through mass deportation programs, we're hearing great replacement theory. Even when we hear things like diversity programs are discriminatory and they're taking jobs, we're also hearing great replacement theory.
So here's one question I have right off the bat, and some people may say that part of what you just said is overreaching, and we'll get to some of that. But here's one question I have right off the bat about great replacement theory. These elites who are supposedly orchestrating the replacement of the white population, most people who we could call elites in this country and in Europe are white. So is the theory that there's a group of rich and powerful white people who are conspiring to make their own race a minority? Because that would seem very illogical.
Yes. And frankly, I as an historian, as a scholar, I try to share what the argument is, not necessarily make sense of it, but that is precisely the theory. And I should also add that that comes from another theory or another element or a previous manifestation of great replacement theory. So now it's imagined that there are these globalists who are largely white and liberal and progressive who are enabling the replacement. But not too long ago, the globalist was called international Jewry, who was framed as these people who were seeking world domination and that all of Europe's ills were the result of so-called international Jewry. So this is this is an there's an anti-Semitic and certainly racist element to this theory.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up because it relates to a clip that I'm going to play from one of the most infamous examples of the expression of this, where the idea of replacement was very much in the news. And frankly, Dr. Kendi, that took me a while to actually understand. And that is the so-called Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, in the first year of President Trump's first term, when rally goers were recorded on video chanting this.
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us!
And Dr. Kendi, honestly, it took me a while after Charlottesville to think I understood that chant. Tell me if you think I have it right today. I guess your previous answer indicates that I probably do. Because I wondered, since Jews are only 2% of the U.S. population, how could these rallygoers have thought Jews could possibly replace them? But they were really saying Jews are orchestrating white replacement theory by bringing in other groups, non-Jews, by the way, who are more numerous, like Muslim refugees from Syria at the time and Latinos from Latin America. Is that what that Charlottesville chant meant?
It is, and frankly, when we think of the person who engaged in a mass shooting of a synagogue in Pittsburgh, this is a person who believed that this Jewish immigration society was enabling his people to be slaughtered, and that's how he justified going in and ultimately slaughtering people. But similarly in Buffalo, when a mass shooter ended up killing a number of Black people, he believed that Black people were the most visible group of replacers today. And just as you've had Muslims who have also been suffered mass shootings based on this theory. There was a shooter who shot dozens of Muslims in Christchurch, New Zealand, and wrote a manifesto called The Great Replacement.
You're right that great replacement theory is not the same as white nationalism. Why not?
Because most of these theorists who are pushing this theory are thinking globally and thinking internationally. They are saying things like the West is being destroyed. That's not France or the United States. That is a transnational idea. I mean, even the current war with Iran, you have people who are articulating great replacement theory as this to justify that war, calling it a clash of civilizations. The West, the Christian, Judeo-Christian West, as they call it, versus Islam, with Iran at the head of the snake. So these are certainly people who who are nationalists, but they're also, and this is what I try to emphasize in Chain of Ideas, they believe that they believe that the West is being replaced by Black people, Muslims, and immigrants of color.
Listeners, questions are welcome for Ibram X. Kendi, Howard University history professor, about his new book, Chain of Ideas, The Origins of Our Authoritarian Age. 212-433, WNYC, 212-433-9692, call or text. I see you organize the book around 10 what you call links, and I'm just going to read them out for the listeners because they're only one line each. So they are: link 1, white people lose out as peoples of color gained. Link 2, racial inequity data should be ignored. 3, racism is biological prejudice and interpersonal discrimination. I guess you mean only that. Link 4, racism against people of color is over. Link 5, anti-white racism is on the rise. Link 6, white Christians are indigenous to the nation. Indigenous. Link 5, anti-white... Oh, wait, read that one. Link 7, fight for freedom as patriots, like the nation's founders, a directive. Link 8, stand in the legacy of anti-slavery, anti-colonialism, civil rights activism, and anti-fascism, like make it sound like your cause is rooted in those things. Link 9, insurrections against democracy protect the nation, protect. And link 10, fight for privileges provided by dictators instead of power provided by democracy. So, Dr. Kendi, let me ask you about a couple of those that really jumped out at me. Number 2, racial inequality data should be ignored. And I feel like I see this constantly in our national discourse today, and unfortunately in the news media, and I try to be an exception to that. Also see it in the backlash to affirmative action in college admissions or anything labeled DEI. And the thing is that despite the centrality of that backlash in politics, in the media, and at the Supreme Court right now, the wealth of white Americans to black Americans on average is still 10 to 1, according to the Census Bureau, 10 to 1, that's census data. The unemployment rate as of last month, according to the Labor Department, was about 4% for whites, 7% for blacks. Official government statistics there under Trump. We could find similar things for college degrees, home ownership, annual incomes. And to me, these things measure the foundational inequality that has never really been solved since slavery and Jim Crow were abolished. And yet the focus of politics is less on solving the basic thing than on what's fair to white people and how society tries to do it. But that's just my take. What do you have in mind by that principle, that link in the book? It's one of the chapters, this great replacement theory principle that racial inequality data should be ignored.
Sure. So all of these links are deeply connected. And so once you can make people believe that racial inequity data should be ignored, and therefore you should ignore the fact that Black people are on the lower or dying end of nearly every racial disparity, that then gives you the ability to say racism against, let's say, Black people is over. And it more importantly gives you the ability to argue what in many ways is the nucleus of the racist manifestation of great replacement theory, which is that anti-white racism is on the rise, or the primary form of racism in the country today is affecting white people. In order to make that case, you have to completely ignore the racial data that you just described. So that's why they're linked conceptually. You have to get people to believe one before you can get people to believe another.
And your last two links relate very specifically, and of course we could have a conversation about each of the 10, but your last two links relate very specifically, I think, to how great replacement theory connects to authoritarianism, which is in the title of your book. Number 9, insurrections against democracy protect the nation. And number 10, fight for privileges provided by dictators instead of power provided by democracy. So I think you were just starting to get at this to some degree, but how do great replacement theory or the fears that it's built on lead to a devaluing of democracy and support for authoritarians? Tell me more.
So Americans are quite familiar with a politician who essentially loses an election and argues that certain people who voted for his political opponents are not viable voters, and thereby the election was stolen from him. And those ideas then galvanize his supporters to believe that his loss was not democracy in action, that his loss was the very, frankly, opposite of that. And so his supporters are incited to insurrection and ultimately engage in them. So, of course, we experienced that in the United States on January 6th, but the ninth section also documents a similar development happening in Brazil, which also experienced a very similar insurrection when Bolsonaro, a Trump ally, lost an election. I also document insurrections of that magnitude in Asia, as well as in parts of Europe. And so you have these authoritarians essentially galvanizing their supporters to undermine democracy in the name of democracy. via Great Replacement theory that these ethnic minorities or these Black people are stealing the elections. That's happened all over the world, as I document in Chain of Ideas.
Interesting question from a listener in a text. Listener writes, the strongest articulation of these theories I've heard in person have been from a Black American and a Mexican American. Listener writes, please don't make the usual liberal mistake of ignoring or minimizing white supremacist theories among people of color. And you're right about this, right? You've said we shouldn't be surprised to see people of color or LGBTQ people or women as great replacement leaders, even though the theory makes those groups out to be the big threats. So why would that be?
Well, first, in Chain of Ideas, one of my major arguments is that even as great replacement theory has primarily been positioned as a far-right theory, polling data shows that people who identify as centrists and even liberal and leftists also believe elements of great replacement theory. And I document that in Chain of Ideas. I also document how you can have elected officials like the current president of the United States in their stump speeches saying things like, African Americans, your jobs are being stolen and taken by immigrants. Hispanic Americans, your jobs are being taken and stolen by immigrants, as this current president stated in his Republican National Convention speech in 2024. And some of those African Americans and Latino Americans could ultimately believe and internalize the idea that their jobs are being replaced. So without question, in Chain of Ideas, I document all the different manifestations of great replacement theory. And so we started out with the idea that, let's say, people of color are replacing white people. But I also document in the book how people believe that Black immigrants are replacing African Americans, or that women are replacing men, or that the traditional values of Russian Christians are being replaced by queer people. This is a theory that has mutated to essentially position any disadvantaged group as the replacer.
I have one more clip to play. It's from a recent Senate hearing that barely made the news. It was just last month. Extraordinary. Of a Trump nominee to be an Assistant Secretary of State, Jeremy Carl, asserting right out loud that he believes in great replacement theory. He's being questioned here at his confirmation hearing by New Jersey Senator Cory Booker on Lincoln's birthday of all days, February 12th.
What do you mean when you say that you believe in the great replacement theory?
Senator, thank you for that question. This refers to the intentional demographic replacement of Europeans in Europe. It was invented by Renaud Camus, who was a French scholar.
You think there's an active effort to, quote unquote, replace Americans right now?
Senator, I think the Democratic Party, through its immigration policies, has certainly shown signs of that.
So, Dr. Kendi, that's an example of how mainstream this has become, right? Knowing that Jeremy Carl held that view, Trump nominated him to be an Assistant Secretary of State. Secretary of State Marco Rubio supported that nomination, and Mr. Carl felt comfortable enough putting it right out there, like, yeah, I believe in great replacement theory. Is that indicative of anything that's very 2026 in any way?
It is, and it's indicative of also the number of people within the Trump administration who believe elements of great replacement theory. I mean, the U.S., Trump's U.S. Homeland Security Advisor, Stephen Miller, is a longtime proponent of great replacement theory, and as obviously he's been the architect of so much of this administration's immigration policy. I should also just add very quickly that Carl described Renaud Camus as a scholar. He's a novelist and a poet. And I think it's important to just draw that distinction, because he's trying to give legitimacy to a theory that has always been a conspiracy theory, trying to add some sort of scientific credibility. This is a person, Renaud Camus, who stated in You Will Not Replace Us, a book that he wrote after what happened in Charlottesville, that if science and data does not show that the great replacement is happening, then that doesn't speak to a problem of the Great Replacement. That speaks to the problem of science and data. This is a person who's anti-science, anti-data, anti-scholarship. So it was fascinating for me to hear Carl describe him as a scholar.
We should also note, however, that nominee, Mr. Carl, withdrew from consideration after some Republican senators said they would not vote to confirm him because of views like what we just played. Does it give you hope that there's at least that much rejection of, maybe even revulsion against, promoting Great Replacement theory by a meaningful number of people in the Conservative Party of the United States?
I mean, certainly, I think it's a good thing that Carl was not confirmed. But as I mentioned earlier, the animating philosophy of, I should say, the animating political theory of the Trump administration has been Great Replacement theory. And not just the Trump administration, presidents and prime ministers of countries as diverse as Italy, El Salvador, India, and Hungary, Russia. These are also politicians who are espousing different forms of Great Replacement theory, which is partly how I've been able to make the case that this is the most dominant political theory of our time.
Listener texts. Sorry, they're coming in too fast for me to keep. The one I wanted on the screen. Wait, I'm gonna get it. So the theory is really that old political cartoon of "watch out, that other guy is trying to take your cookie," said by the guy holding 99% of the cookies. It's weaponized artificial scarcity. So that's an interesting laugh line that that a listener suggests. Now, I said I was going to ask you some pushback questions, and here we go. And I'm going to base these on some reviews of your book. And I should say these reviews were mostly positive, but they also raise some questions. So New York Magazine wonders if you stretched the idea too far by including El Salvador's strongman Bukele in this. The article says that country really did have the world's highest murder rate, so the support for authoritarian solutions may have come from things other than wanting to marginalize a despised other. I'm paraphrasing. Is the idea, the way you describe it, overbroad?
No, and I define it, and one of the ways we can understand it is there's three elements to Great Replacement theory. First is that there are these powerful elites who are typically imagined to be operating in a political party or even sort of economic actors. Two, that there is this group of people who are coming to destroy, and three, that there are a group of people who are being destroyed, by the so-called replacers. In El Salvador, Bukele has positioned his political opposition parties as the powerful elites. He has positioned his supporters as the people who are being replaced and destroyed, a group he calls the good people. And then he's positioned everyone else, people who are in opposition to his dictatorship, as all in cahoots with the gangs. So any journalist who is seeking to accurately report on his administration, he positions them as in cahoots with the gangs and is trying to destroy the citizenry. I talk about in Chain of Ideas that it's important for us to not just understand how theories operate today. It's important for us to understand how they can continue to mature and mutate. So I talked about El Salvador in many ways as the future of Great Replacement theory.
And your proposed solutions to the rise of authoritarianism fueled by Great Replacement theory got dinged a little in the review that was published in Business Standard. So it says, Kendi's solutions for our present social ills mostly aimed to quarantine dangerous ideas. Kendi recommends the banning of great replacement politicians when they break the law, and he goes on, we must systematize civic, anti-racist, queer, feminist, and multicultural education. And then they write, Kendi does acknowledge that economic insecurity has made people more susceptible to right-wing populism, but this admission feels perfunctory. Despite a few pages here and there on the links between Great Replacement Party success and inflation, COVID, and the Great Recession, Kendi tends to treat racist ideas as an all-powerful means of control and the global realities underlying right-wing grievance, especially mass migration generated by war, want, and climate change, as exaggerated, if not illusory. Your reaction to that? I guess that writer is trying to say, yeah, there are big things going on in the world economy and other things that fuel this, and if you're going to look for solutions, they should address that, not just say racism is bad.
Well, it's interesting because in the epilogue that this person cites, I state that this book could have been titled Chain of Conditions. And I write about how it is conditions more than any other factor, the conditions that so-called critic describes, that have actually made people susceptible to this theory. And I spent the bulk of so each of the sections in the text, there are 10 sections, I describe a different set of historical conditions, like the Great Recession, like the inflation crisis, like a whole bunch of other economic ills that actually led to politicians being able to capitalize on people's status losses and basically tell them that those people are stealing from you. So that's what becomes frustrating, I think, for us as writers, when we literally do something in a text.
And somebody says you didn't do it.
One
last thing.
What else can we do?
As we run out of time, a couple of people have texted an example that we're all familiar with of when a great replacement actually happened. The way one listener puts it, I thought that it was an Apache or a Lenape writer 500 years ago who first proposed the replacement theory. And I think that person is being sarcastic. But of course, white European settlers and their descendants really did engage in replacement theory. At least that's how it turned out.
Yeah, and actually, I give an example of in Latin America after the end of chattel slavery, you had a number of Latin American politicians who decided that they wanted to actively whiten their populations. And so what they did roughly
and
between
we have 20 seconds left. I apologize.
Roughly between 1880s and 1920s was essentially go out and recruit white European immigrants to come, offer them land, offer them all sorts of privileges they refused to give people of color and indigenous people.
Ibram X. Kendi, Howard University history professor. His new book is Chain of Ideas, The Origins of Our Authoritarian Age. Thank you for sharing it with us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
On this week's On the Media, the New York Times sued the Pentagon to get its reporters back in the building and won. The Pentagon said, not so fast.
A spokesman said yesterday an area of the building known as Correspondence Corridor, which reporters have used for decades to cover the DoD, will close immediately.
Don't miss this week's On the Media from WNYC. Find On the Media wherever you get your podcasts.
It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning again, everyone. So now we turn to artificial intelligence and a controversy it has created in the book publishing world. Last week, Hachette Book Group, which is one of the largest publishers in the United States, right, pulled a forthcoming book after widespread allegations online that the author used AI to help write the horror novels. The author, Mia Ballard, has denied using AI to help write the book titled Shy Girl. She said an editor had hired for the self-published version of the novel had used AI without her knowledge. But still, there's an AI component to this story. Hachette has canceled the book's spring release here in the United States and said it will also discontinue the book in the UK, where it was already published last fall. And the stat I see is that it has already sold 1,800 print copies. Our next guest argues that the Shy Girl fiasco, as she calls it, highlights not only the challenges of AI in fiction that publishers are having a hard time meeting, but also how that might influence readers' trust in the art form. Andrea Bartz is a novelist, most recently the author of The Last Ferry Out. Her guest op-ed in the New York Times that you might have read is titled "The Shy Girl Fiasco Shows Why Trust in Writers is Plummeting." Andrea Bartz, thanks for coming on to talk about your op-ed. Welcome to WNYC.
Thanks so much. Thank you for having me on.
So for listeners who haven't been following this story, how did Hachette come to realize that Shy Girl was written partly or largely with AI?
My understanding is that it came to light largely through readers. This book began as a self-published book and got enough traction that Hachette picked it up to publish it more traditionally. But readers began noticing that passages from it sounded to them like AI slop, and they made TikToks about it. They, started conversations about it. This led to a New York Times investigation of it. And when the New York Times sort of handed over their information about the allegations, that was when Hachette decided they were no longer going to publish this book.
I don't know if you have an example that's easy to say on the radio, but do you have an example of some of the language in the book, a line from the book or a paragraph or something that looked to readers like AI slop?
I don't have the book in front of me, but there are certain telltale signs that come up a lot. For example, using lists of 3 items. This book is tight, taut, and page turning. Things that, real writers do, but they're now seen as sort of the hallmarks of, a ChatGPT or another generative AI model.
By the way, for people who don't know, what is the word slop? I know that's an expression that people use, AI slop. Why slop?
Yeah, so it generally means whatever writing a large language model such as ChatGPT is putting out. It can also mean things like videos, things like AI generated images. It's basically the output of one of those models. And so it sounds very derogatory, but I use it sort of as anything that a model is giving us that's not written by a human or created by a human, but sort of is a, facsimile of a human-made creation.
But I guess one scary element of this story is that AI, if it was largely AI, wrote a novel that gained enough traction that it went from self-published to Hachette picking it up.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I know, we all remember what ChatGPT was like when it first was released to the public a few years ago and how much it's improved since then. These models are just improving so quickly, exponentially. They're getting better and better at impersonating human authors. And so my fear is that as they get better and better, we won't really be able to rely on our internal slop detectors anymore to say, that sounds like AI to me and not a person.
Why do you frame your op-ed in the context of trust?
So I think that, authors create books to connect with readers, right? We are, especially us novelists, we are, alchemizing our humanity into something we put on the page that we hope readers are going to respond to. It's going to resonate with them. And so there's this sort of implicit trust between a writer that I'm putting something real out to you and the reader to say, if I feel something from reading this, it's because I'm having a human connection with the author who wrote these words. And so, that trust could erode if readers begin to worry that anything they've written, oh, that hit my ear so right. Wait, but was that actually a human or was that AI slop that was so well done I didn't notice? And once that kind of contract of trust erodes, that's bad news for writers and readers and for publishing, which is an industry already struggling in a lot of ways.
All right, listeners, calling all creatives, writers, artists, musicians, anyone else. How has artificial intelligence been showing up in your various artistic media? 212-433-WNYC You can also weigh in on the idea in Andrea's op-ed that the specter of AI in fiction can erode the audience's trust. And again, you can apply this to any art form that you're involved with. Have there been any shy girl moments in your industry where an artist was called out for not disclosing AI in their work? Or maybe you use AI in a way that's really beneficial to your work and you think there's a line before which it's okay. 212-433 WNYC, maybe not exactly to produce a work, but to help organize your creative process in some way, maybe something like that. So for those of you pro AI, in some instances, we invite you to make your case too. 212-433 WNYC, 212-433-9692, call or text. And of course, to listeners who were actually following the Shy Girl fiasco, as Andrea calls it, around the novel Shy Girl, we can hear some of your hot takes on the controversy itself. Self-identified avid readers. Maybe you're living in the UK and you already bought the book. How did you feel after reading it? Maybe enjoying it, and then hearing how it was produced. 212-433 WNYC, 212-433-9692. Call or text, calling all creatives. So, Andrea, is there any legitimate use, kind of as part of the, caller invitation I was framing there, for AI in creating a novel or any other work of art?
My opinion on the topic is no. I don't think there is any use for something that was built on the backs of unpaid and non-consenting artists in order to create something that is trying to push them out of the market. So I say no. However, there are other authors who feel like it's fine to use for idea generation, for different elements like that. There's even examples of authors sort of proudly saying, I co-write my novels with AI. I disagree with that, but I think at minimum, readers have shown via this Shy Girl fiasco that they really want authors to be upfront about whether they're using it or not.
Do you feel like it's even unfair competition for you? You're a writer of thriller novels. I see a category which can sometimes overlap with horror novels, like the genre that Shy Girl was marketed as. And I saw that the University of Cambridge recently put out a report highlighting that certain genres of fiction are easier for AI to copy, and they are primarily romance, according to that report, but also thrillers and horror. So I want to get your thoughts on whether more categories or certain categories of writing are more susceptible, and if you feel it's in a way unfair competition.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say, as the models get better and better, I do think that no author will be safe. I think even a nonfiction book could be potentially AI written. I mean, think about a student writing a paper for school. A nonfiction book might not be that different once these models get good enough to really sound like an author putting together an entire book. But I agree that right now it's these commercial genres, like you said, like mysteries, like romance, that do seem a little bit more susceptible. And that makes sense to me. They're generally a little more focused on plot and kind of following a formula, if you will, than on character development. Though, of course, a good story is going to balance both. But I think everyone is at risk, even those writing really beautiful, heartfelt, character-driven literary fiction. Last year on X, Sam Altman, the CEO of ChatGPT, teased a new model of ChatGPT that he says is exceptionally good at creative writing. And to prove it, he showed its output when prompted to write autofiction. And I can't think of a genre, that AI would be less suited for. But I really think it's a question all authors of all stripes will have to confront. And I absolutely think that I, as a human author, will be competing with, books by AI models that nobody has to pay, that can spit out a book very, very quickly.
Right.
And that's quite scary to me.
Yeah, and on how quickly and effectively it can spit it out. And before we go to some interesting looking callers who are waiting now, I see that you conducted a little experiment. You gave ChatGPT a prompt to attempt to write in your style. How'd that go?
Right. So shortly after ChatGPT was released, so this is not even the current model. I shudder to think how good it's gotten since then. But out of curiosity, I said, write a short story in the style of author Andrea Bartz. And what it came back with, it wasn't really a good story. It was more of a scene, but it was an eerie, sort of uncanny valley version of my writing. It really nailed some of the stylistic choices I make, some of the patterns that I often follow in my writing, some of the word choices. And I thought it won't be long before somebody can, train an AI model to sound like them and then just have it do the writing for them.
How did that feel when you saw that it could copy some of your writing style pretty well? How did it just feel, like, emotionally?
It felt incredibly violating. It felt very, very creepy. I have had humans plagiarize my work before, and have found out about it after the fact and have felt very violated. But this was different because it wasn't a human doing it. It was a, a machine that was trained on my books amidst other books. So of course it can sound like me. It's not so much that when I write, I sound like AI. It's that AI has been trained to sound like us human authors, and that just creates a real fiasco to keep coming back to that word.
Let's talk to a playwright who's calling in. Patty in Connecticut. Patty, you're on WNYC. Hello.
Hi, good morning, Brian. Thanks for having me on. I'm a playwright, and it's submission season, and the hardest thing about submitting your play is writing those synopses. And so my husband sort of said to me about a month ago, why don't you just try ChatGPT? And I was pretty blown away by how it was able to synopsize my play in a way that I really, really struggle, spend many, many hours on after, spending a year or two on the script. So I'm kind of a fan of it for log lines and synopses.
Interesting. You have any reaction to that, Andrea? It sounds like she already wrote the play. She was looking for a synopsis, and rather than do what might be a little bit of grunt work, if I can characterize it that way, AI did that part for her.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. AI is really good at that. We've all seen the notes it can send after a Zoom meeting or something like that. For me, at that point, the use of AI shifts from being about putting in the grunt work to all of the other downstream reasons it's bad, in my opinion. The effects on the environment, the fact that it was, built on plagiarism and on stealing ebooks from authors without paying. I also think that the act of summarizing something is sort of how we learn, for example, if you read a long PDF and then write a summary of it afterward, that's how you sort of commit and figure out what's the important thing to take away from this. And so having AI do the work for you, or worse, opening up a PDF and clicking, oh yeah, just show me the summary. It takes away the step that actually gets it into our brains. So I know this is a really narrow use. And so I try to say this non-judgmentally, but I really am afraid of what AI is doing for our critical thinking, for our brains, for our ability to look at something long and complicated and figure out the takeaway from it.
Here's a different kind of writer. Kevin in Bridgeport, a songwriter. Kevin, you're on WNYC. Hello.
Hello. Yes. Hi. Thanks for having me on. I'm a musician and a songwriter and a performing musician, and I make my living mainly from performance. But I have a lot of songs that I've been kind of hanging on to, and I'm like, this year I'm going to put all these songs out that I've had, some of them for years. And I started thinking, people are going to think you must be using AI because all of a sudden you're putting out a bunch of songs. We've never heard these songs before. So I'm like, wow, I'm going to have to probably put without AI, written without AI. That's one part of the fear, which is, not a big it's not going to stop me or anything, but it's now this is a reality. And the thing that, I've worked with other songwriters when we collaborate, and sometimes I'll show them some of my songs just so they get a sense of what I'm doing while we're writing. And then I've noticed that a week or two later, when we get together, they'll be kind of stealing some of my lyrical ideas. So then I'm like, oh, okay, well, I don't want to necessarily show them all my tunes because I want this to be whatever we're coming up with. Because I thought, well, there's some songs that I haven't finished, and it's usually for me the lyrics that are always the most challenging. So I thought, well, what would it be like to see if AI could finish this song lyrically? But then I'm like, I don't want to put my music into the algorithm out there and then have it just become a part of what anybody else could easily call up. But the final thing is that drives me, that I feel about with writing prose and music, especially with music, it's an expression of emotion. It's an emotional expression. And AI has no emotion. It's just mimicking, what we're doing. And I just don't know how. I mean, I've heard songs that have become popular, and now Spotify, apparently, I've heard, they create their own AI songs and put them out for monetary reasons because they can flood their playlists with songs that they created and make 100% of the royalties because it's not a real, it's not a person. So there are lots of very ethical issues with it, and I just feel like emotionally that it's not a person and it's not coming from an emotional place. So it's kind of frightening to think that people connect with something that is not connected to a person or an emotion.
Yeah, very articulate, Kevin, on a number of elements there. Stay there for a second. I'm curious if our guest, Andrea Bartz, the novelist who wrote the New York Times op-ed called The Shy Girl Fiasco, shows why trust in writers is plummeting. And for those of you just joining, Shy Girl was a novel that was pulled by its publisher when they figured out that a lot of it was written by AI. Andrea, I'm curious if you want to talk to Kevin at all.
Yeah, thank you for calling in and sharing all that. I think there's a lot of parallels between what I'm experiencing as, a novelist and what you're experiencing as a musician and songwriter. I think we both share a desire to connect with our fans, right? The creator-patron relationship is really important to both of us. And AI really threatens to erode that. And I agree with you that it's really scary and it raises a lot of ethical questions. And I guess my hope is that readers and music fans and all patrons are going to decide, well, even if the AI stuff is technically better, I want the human stuff anyway. I read books or I listen to a song because I want to feel that connection with the person behind it, not the machine behind it. But it's really scary, and people can be shady about what they're creating and whether or not they did use AI to do it. And I think there's really a lot of parallels between what's going on in your business and mine right now.
Yeah, and I'm so glad, Kevin, you brought up. Oh, go ahead. You go.
No, I was just going to quickly say that I'm kind of amazed that I'm speaking with you right now because I read your op-ed when it came out, and I was like, oh, yes, oh my God. And I read about the Shy Girl thing, too, and I didn't realize, all of the elements of that. But go ahead, Brian. What were you going to say?
Well, let me ask a follow-up question to both of you from another listener who sent us a text that said, why not just have a labeling regime? We have natural and synthetic fibers, natural or chemical food. Why not natural and synthetic books? And to me, Kevin, that reminded me of something you said earlier in your call, which is you're thinking of putting out your songs with a label not written with AI.
I mean, I think it's a great idea. I think people should know what they're getting. And some people won't care. But like when I'm performing live, the thing that's amazing about it is, and I'm sure it's just like a play, or when you're in you go to a museum and you actually see. When I remember seeing a Van Gogh piece for the first, it's like you have a connection. Yeah. You have this emotional, visceral connection, and when I'm performing, the audience is feeling something, and then as a performer, that's coming back to me, and it affects how I perform and how they. So, I'm sure that in terms of being an author, maybe you don't feel that until you're maybe doing a reading or whatever. But you get letters from your fans, and they tell you how important it is and what it means to them. And I don't know. I just feel like I think people want to know that it's a real emotion and a real experience. So
Kevin,
I think that's a good
great.
idea.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm so glad, Andrew, that he explicitly brought human emotion into it as the driver of the arts by people as opposed to AI. How do you feel about maybe releasing your books with a label, not written with AI?
Well, I think it's a good step. I understand the push to put on our own work. Okay, this is not written by a human and not by AI. But the problem is that now that it's becoming clear that readers really don't seem to love books written by AI. Look what happened with Shy Girl. Look what happened with novelist James Frey's latest release, which he kind of talked about himself as a writer who co-writes with AI, and then his book maybe didn't do as well as expected. That will incentivize authors to potentially lie, to not be honest about using AI, or to sort of justify it to themselves. Oh, well, I rewrote what it wrote, so it doesn't actually count as me using generative AI. Certifications do exist. Some are better than others. But my understanding is that AI detectors are running on large language models too. It seems like sort of an arms race. And some of them lack teeth. Some of them are more self-reported. An author can sign, an attestation saying that they wrote it without AI. But that doesn't mean that they necessarily did. And so if there's a lack of trust in the certifications as well, then they don't really help.
Wasn't James Frey the same guy who got into trouble like 20 years ago for fabricating or exaggerating parts of his memoir?
He sure is. That is a man who courts controversy.
And now with AI. Naomi in Brooklyn, a different kind of creator, a cook. You're on WNYC. Hi, Naomi.
Hi. I was just calling in because this conversation came up in my work recently. A lot of the creative part of my work is able to be creative because I have to deal with accounting and finance and things like that. So I use AI from time to time as a qualitative calculator. So it kind of ties in elements of like, okay, well, if I need to use 300 pieces of this specific kind of cheese or a teaspoon of this every month, what is that going to cost me per dish, per month? And what's really interesting is I feel like my kind of administrative art enables the creative aspects of my cooking, but also like is really critical to me sustaining myself in business. And I worked with someone once who just like kind of, you could tell that their entire work was just regurgitated by AI. And not only was it really frustrating because it made operations really difficult and complicated because it wasn't fully fleshed out or in touch with the reality of our industry, but it kind of felt insulting because, there's so many elements of like every aspect of my intellect that go into my work. It's not only the food and anticipating the needs of the clients or our guests, but it's like knowing exactly how and where to use specific kinds of information. It's not just, plug and play.
Yeah. Naomi, thank you very much. I'm going to sneak one more in here. Is it Lana or Iana in New Rochelle, professor of literature?
Yes.
Hi there.
Yes, it's Lana. Yes, I am a French literature professor and a first-time author of a novel set in contemporary Paris, Berlin, and New York. I have never used AI for even one sentence of this manuscript. Fortunately, I have saved many iterations of the manuscript since I began writing it in 2022. It is now definitively done. I have to move on. I'm trying to find an agent. How can I protect myself from accusations of having used AI?
Andrea, anything for her?
It's a really important question and one that I hope we soon have better answers for. It sounds like you're doing the right thing by just saving every single iteration of it. I write my books in Google Drive myself in Google Docs, and so I have a revision history. But I don't know that there's much we can do beyond that right now. Some of the AI detectors have really high rates of false positives. And so somebody theoretically could say, look, this online detector thinks that that's AI, even though it's not. So I think being public about your stance, being upfront about the fact that you did not and will not use generative AI is one thing you can do sort of to protect your reputation. And I think saving every single draft and being really clear to document the painstaking process of writing a book is kind of the best we can do right now.
Lana, I hope that's helpful. We're almost out of time. I'm curious if you think the cancellation of Shy Girl means that publishers are gearing up for this fight in a productive way.
I guess I hope so, but the book got pretty far and got, released in the UK before anyone even seemed to notice at Hachette that there was an issue. So I'm really not sure. Again, it's this arms race where if AI is getting better and better and people are buying the books not realizing that they're partially AI written, why wouldn't publishers just say, great, more product to put out into the market? And so I really hope that there's internal discussions that I'm not privy to about how they're going to, regain and maintain readers' trust and not let this happen again.
Well, the least I can do after you sharing all these thoughts with us and your op-ed is let you plug your book, your latest novel, The Last Ferry Out, which came out last year. 30 seconds for any blurb of yourself that you would like.
Well, thank you for that. The Last Ferry Out is about a woman who travels to the tropical island where her partner died, only to discover that it was no accident, and now she might be trapped on an island with the killer. However, my best-known book, which also has vacation vibes, is called We Were Never Here, and that's about two globe-trotting besties who kill a backpacker in self-defense. But it's not the first time that one of their trips has ended in bloodshed. And I really appreciate that chance to plug my books.
Andrea Bartz wrote the guest op-ed in the New York Times called The Shy Girl Fiasco Shows Why Trust in Writers is Plummeting. And that book. Thanks so much for coming on with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
This conversation was produced without artificial intelligence.
This week on the New Yorker Radio Hour, I'll talk with the actor John Lithgow, who's on Broadway playing the author Roald Dahl, whose anti-Semitic statements caused an international scandal.
His anti-Semitism is obvious, like a leaky car battery. It's just in between the lines, in some cases just explicit.
John Lithgow joins me next time on the New Yorker Radio Hour from WNYC. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Little Center Field by John Fogerty. And to end the show today, we'll mark Major League Baseball's opening day with a sports writer and a pediatrician who've co-authored a book for parents and kids. And a question for you, listeners: have lessons from your sport ever informed more serious things in your life, or a way for you to teach a life lesson to a kid? Again, have lessons from your sport ever informed more serious things in your life, or a way for you to teach a life lesson to a kid? 212-433-WNYC. Call or text 212-433-9692. Our guests are longtime New York sports writer Ken Davidoff and Dr. Harley Rothbart, pediatrician and a middle and high school coach, on their new book, 101 Lessons from the Dugout, What Baseball and Softball Can Teach Us About the Game of Life. It's also got a foreword by former New York Mets great David Wright. And listeners, don't tell Ken, but there may be a question before the end of this segment about the Mets and the Yankees here on opening day. Ken and Dr. Rothbart, congratulations on the book. Welcome to WNYC.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
So, Dr. Rothbart, I see this is Ken's first book, but you've written many previous books like No Regrets Parenting, Germ Proof Your Kids, and 940 Saturdays. What made you want to team up with a sports writer?
Legitimacy. Ken has brought to this book project, which really I started 15 years ago. Ken has brought a street cred and a dugout cred to the book, and a professionalism that being on dirt fields with kids for 10 years could never have brought for me. So I am grateful to Ken for upping my game.
A doctor tells a sports writer that he adds legitimacy. That's a new one. But Ken, I'll let you model this for our callers with a really easy example from the book. Lesson number 19. the sacrifice. And for people who don't know, that's a play in baseball where a batter intentionally makes an out for himself to help a teammate move up a base. So talk about the sacrifice, lesson 19, as you have it in the book.
Sure, Brian. This is one of our more literal lessons because, it's just like in baseball, you give yourself up, right? You make an out to move your teammate over, to move your teammate closer to scoring position. There are many times in life where you give up your immediate good, if you will, to help someone else on your team. Reading from the book, sometimes being generous and helping others may set you back, but you'll feel good about your sacrifice even though you may be out of the time you spent or the money or stuff you generously gave away.
Dr. Ropart, in a way, the whole concept is a cliche, right? Life lessons from sports. But sports, for most kids, is playtime. The life lessons you list in the book are serious things, though, like admitting your mistakes, overcoming hard times, standing up for what you believe. Can sports really help kids do well at things like those in the rest of their lives?
Well, I'll tell you, I have real world experience with exactly that. And after the years in the dugout where I watched kids go through some really dire circumstances at home or at school, and oftentimes more minor circumstances that they had to overcome, I was able to use the analogies from sports, which I did my best to categorize in the book, to help the kids. But it went further than that. I was able to apply the lessons from sports to my clinic. And the example that I give is a mom who brought her teenage son in to see me. He had been a ball player in the past, but now was getting in trouble. He was hanging out with the wrong kids. He was hanging out doing the wrong things. He was trying desperately to be popular. And I reminded him of what the first baseman goes through when he is stretching to receive the throw from the infield. You can stretch too far. Try to help your infielders, try to help your friends, try to help your classmates. But when the stretch is too far, you got to take your foot off the base and catch the ball so more damage is not done. And I think that these lessons apply not just on the baseball field when you see troubled kids, but off the baseball field, wherever you are.
Mark in Clifton has one, I think. Mark, you're on WNYC. Hello.
Hi, I love the show, and I love the sport of baseball. I'm so happy to be on. Playing baseball, Little League as a kid, and hitting taught me so many things that I apply to my entire life. And the one I think about all the time is that a 300 hitter who's, at the top of the league does nothing 7 out of 10 times that they come to the plate. And so much of being a great athlete and then connecting with whatever your work is and whatever your goal is keeping your head together those 7 times that nothing happens to make those 3 possible. And it's a wonderful perspective that I was able to pick up early from trying my best to hit as a kid.
Nice, Mark. Thank you very much. Here's one, Ken, that maybe is a little bit intriguing compared to some of the others. You have one about lying. Lesson 22, fake bunts. Where do you go with that?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And I have to admit, Brian, that's one where I actually asked my son who played Little League, because Harley came up with the idea of equating the fake bunt with lying, and my son confirmed that happens a lot at the youth level. But the idea, a fake bunt is sort of a white lie, especially at the youth level, right? You kind of flash bunt like you're going to bunt, and you're trying to fake out the defense and throw them off guard. And the idea being, it seems harmless, but it can cause a little bit of damage. White lies are life's fake bunts, sneaky and a little dishonest. People who tell white lies usually mean to protect someone's feeling, to hide bad news. Instead, white lies often backfire, hurting others by causing false hope and disappointment and losing their trust. So that was an interesting one.
There's a big segment there somewhere on white lies versus radical transparency. Mark in Norwalk, you're on WNYC. Hi, Mark.
Hello, Brett. How are you?
Good. What you got?
Okay, so I'm a sailor, and sailing is the perfect metaphor for life. Choosing between strategic goals and tactical goals, or longer-term thinking versus short-term. and also like letting somebody ahead in this one instance, but then getting ahead in the long run. Also, just the discipline that is required to, the practice and study and everything, and you just get better. And it's the same thing in life. You have to practice the things and work hard.
Mark, thank you very much. Dr. Rothbart, the frame of the book is life lessons from baseball and softball. A generation ago, softball wouldn't even have been in there, but I imagine it's your way of being gender inclusive in a modern book for kids, because that's what girls play on their teams, obviously. Do you have anything gender specific that some of these lessons, apply especially to softball or to girls because of their position in sports or society as a whole?
Well, I think that the issues of self-image, really they apply, they're not gender specific. They apply to everyone, but maybe, forgive me if I'm stereotyping, maybe girls are more conscious of self-image. And there is a lot in softball and in baseball to teach us about self-image. And I think that one of the most telling of the lessons is the batting order. And that is where you're put in the batting order oftentimes says to you what the coach thinks of you, or what your teammates think of you, or what the fans think of you. And the leadoff hitter has a great self-image because they're thought of as the best hitter. And the number 9 hitter has maybe the worst self-image. But the reality is that the batting order only matters in the first inning, because after that, anybody can be leadoff. And so I think we have to emphasize for girls, but for boys, of course, also, that the image that others cast upon you should not be binding, that you need to see yourself as a number 1 hitter, as the leadoff hitter, regardless of how others may see you. That image of yourself has to be paramount.
By the way, Ken, for you as a sports writer, why softball for girls, if I can digress? They can play baseball too. Why isn't there girls baseball like there's girls soccer and basketball and tennis, etc., rather than a different sport?
Well, women's baseball is actually on the rise, Brian, so much so that there's a professional league starting this year. But yeah, to answer your question, I think there's just history. Obviously, there's the movie, which of course now the Penny Marshall. Thank you, Penny Marshall, A League of Their Own, which documented the professional women's baseball during World War II. And I think in recent years there has been a rise. To answer your question simply, I think it's just the history of, for whenever it happened, girls played softball, boys baseball. But I do think that is evolving.
And Brian, the best pitcher on my 12-year-old team was a girl.
Ken,
baseball.
As we run, that is great to know. Yeah, Little League is becoming co-ed.
Absolutely. Yep.
And then up from there, maybe over time. We're almost out of time. Ken, for you as a sports writer for more than 30 years with the Post, Newsday, Bergen Record, I see you grew up as a Yankee fan. Do you still watch? Do you have anything you think will be interesting and fun to watch for this year with either the Yankees or the Mets? 20 seconds or so.
Yeah, I watch now Unburdened, Brian, because I used to be focused. What's the story? What's the column? What's the angle? Now I just watch. And I think this will be a fascinating season. And for your Mets, I think they're going to make the playoffs. I think they're going to be a lot better than last year.
And anything on the Yankees in particular? Just fun to watch for? I don't need a prediction.
Fun to watch. This young pitcher they just sent to the minors, Carlos Lagrange, throws about 102 miles per hour. He will come up at some point, and I can't wait to see him.
Sports writer Ken Davidoff and pediatrician Dr. Harley Rothbart have written 101 lessons from the dugout, what baseball and softball can teach us about the game of life. Thank you for sharing some of it with us.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Thanks for listening to Brian Lehrer Weekend. We're back on the radio Monday morning at 10 a.m. In the meantime, follow us on Blue Sky at The Brian Lehrer Show, where there's always a conversation 24/7.
Since WNYC's first broadcast in 1924, we've been dedicated to creating the kind of content we know the world needs. Since then, New York Public Radio's rigorous journalism has gone on to win a Peabody Award and a DuPont Columbia Award, among others. In addition to this award-winning reporting, your sponsorship also supports inspiring storytelling and extraordinary music that is free and accessible to all. To get in touch and find out more, visit sponsorship.wnyc.org.